Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor. Of course, Elon Musk's purchase of the social media platform formerly known as Twitter has brought on quite a few revelations about how that operation used to work hand in hand with the government to censor people, censor entities. The New York Post, the Hunter Biden laptop story, how the FBI was involved in that. It was a little stunning to learn, actually to have our suspicions affirmed is more accurate. But now we're learning about how non-government organizations are also getting into the game. Our friends over at Libs of TikTok, which of course is run by Harsanyi, she put out on Twitter that she has been bullied by none other than the Anti-Defamation League. Let's take a look at what she put out there. And to be more accurate, X, as it's now called, has been bullied by the ADL to censor her account and to push to remove her from the platform. Elon Musk actually affirmed all of this with his own tweet too, saying that his organization and other social media organizations, let's take a look at that tweet if we could, or X, who have pushed advertisers, thanks to the encouragement of groups like the Anti-Defamation League, to try to silence or at least pull ad revenue from their platforms if they allow users like Harsanyi, Libs of TikTok, to continue. Now, here's the important thing. The ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, was founded to combat anti-Semitism. Harsanyi is actually an Orthodox Jew, and she doesn't tweet anything or post anything that has to do with religion, and certainly not the Jewish religion. We went to the ADL's website, and their mission statement is pretty clear: to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all. So what's going on here? Why is the ADL so interested in things that are political and not seemingly associated with the defamation of the Jewish people? Let's bring on David Harsanyi. He's the senior editor of the Federalist. And David, I remember the ADL. Abe Foxman, he was their legendary director, I think all through the late 80s into the 90s and the 2000s. And he had a pretty clear mission, and that was to push back against the defamation of Jewish people, because, well, we saw how devastating and horrific and evil that can be coming out of World War II. So what's going on here?
Well, I would say about a decade ago, the new president, I think he was called then, maybe now he's CEO, his name is Jonathan Greenblatt, I think, was an Obama appointee, and he was named, he was charged with leading the ADL, which since then, and even before then, frankly, to some extent, has just become a partisan left-wing organization that constantly exaggerates the threat of right-wing anti-Semitism, which of course exists, and diminishes or ignores the threat of institutionalized left-wing anti-Semitism, meaning in progressive activist groups, in the government of the United States, in Congress, things like that. So it obviously will not like Elon Musk for, if he has or not, I'm not sure, but it opened up Twitter to more free speech. With that, you're of course going to get some ugly voices as well, and that's the price to pay for free expression. So it would not surprise me if they had ginned up some kind of boycott against X or Twitter.
Right.
Though the number, the 22 billion, seems like a pretty high number to me, but I'm no expert on advertising revenue.
And listen, it would be one thing if Mr. Greenblatt and the ADL were encouraging Elon Musk and the leadership at X.com to silence neo-Nazi voices or anti-Semitic voices specifically. But Libs of TikTok, I mean, if anything, they push back on transgender issues, right? And people who are trying to encourage children to have puberty blockers, that sort of. Unless I'm missing something from the account. I've met Harsanyi. She is an Orthodox observant Jew. We had to accommodate her schedule when we interviewed her because of that. So why is the ADL going after her? That has nothing to do with the Jewish people.
Because they're not, I said this on Twitter and people were a little upset, but I don't really think they're a Jewish organization. They're a progressive activist group that masquerades as a Jewish organization or happens to have Jewish people running it, but pushes things like critical race theory and, sort of far left identitarian views of the world. I don't think there's anything intrinsically or theocratically or anything, theologically, Jewish about that, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, if anything, if you look at Orthodox Jews and their faith and their religion based on the Old Testament, they probably agree with what Libs of TikTok is saying about the LGBTQ agenda.
Yeah, I don't want to get in trouble, but, I think that you have Reform Judaism and even farther left from there, which have basically appropriated leftist socialist ideas and then presented them as faith, which I think is very problematic for Jewish people generally in the United States and elsewhere. But yeah, I mean, obviously they want to go after people who they find politically unsavory, right? So, and that's the problem. Who defines what hate speech is? That's always been the problem with trying to limit discourse. And obviously this is just another example of that.
And so this guy, Jonathan Greenblatt, because he was an Obama administration official, he worked in the Obama White House, and he transitioned right from that job, which is obviously, by definition, a highly partisan political position, and he went right to the ADL, which, of course, that means, by definition, the ADL is now led by a highly partisan political person.
Listen, everyone's got a worldview, so you're never going to get a perfectly apolitical person to run an organization like this, but they have no right to say that they speak for the Jewish people. I mean, they don't speak for me, and I don't speak for other Jews, right? So that is a problem. But like I said, their cynical use of their history and of Judaism and the real. There is anti-Semitism. I think it's somewhat exaggerated, and people think there's more of it than there is, or any kind of systemic or real dangerous anti-Semitism. But it happens. There's violence. There are terrible people on the right and on the left, and but they only seem to focus on one. So that's fine. Say we're a left-wing group that focuses on right-wing anti-Semitism, and then there you have it. The ADL, then it would work better. But that's not what it says it is.
They could be the LADL, the liberal anti, right? Because here's what my concern is. I abhor anti-Semitism. I think that there is a very important role in our society for a group like the Anti-Defamation League. But if they are so politically aligned and affiliated in this way, where they go well beyond just what the ADL originally was focused on, and they become a political activity group, then it sort of diminishes the importance of the original message. In other words, fighting back and combating anti-Semitism is now seen as a political position instead of a human position.
Yeah, but the problem is I don't really know what they accomplish at all, actually, anymore. I mean, I don't know how they're fighting anti-Semitism, really. I mean, I guess in some sense, they would be calling it out. But the problem is they like gin up these fake studies where they, how can I say it? They're part of the grievance industry in some sense. They need the anti-Semitism to exist too. I know this sounds terrible, but they need it to exist, and they need it to seem like it's growing and more dangerous, or they don't exist, and their charge is no longer valid, right?
Yeah.
And it's not, but so there's a lot of dishonesty there.
It's interesting. Yeah. One could argue that if the ADL's mandate now is to fight back against criticism of the transgender activism, then maybe anti-Semitism isn't so bad anymore, because they have to find new fights to pick. And that's, again, not a safe place, I think, for the ADL to be. It's like they're working hand in glove with the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Yeah, I mean, they want people to read critical race theory. On their site, they have critical race theory readings for people to educate themselves. A lot of those authors say that there's an oppressee relationship, and Jews are on the wrong side of that. So how could that same organization tell you to read that book and then say that they're fighting against the defamation? I mean, that's the biggest trope there is, right? Anti-Semitic trope that exists in the West. So how can they tell people to read that and then say they're fighting against the defamation of the Jewish people? It doesn't make sense.
Indeed. All right. Well, hopefully neither of us got in trouble here, David Harsanyi. Thanks for joining us. That said, you're used to being in trouble. It's all right. You're right at the Federalist. Thanks for joining us tonight. There's more to come. It's O'Connor Tonight on Salem News Channel.